The convoy rolled through the Iraqi desert at dawn. 3 Humvees and an armored ambulance painted with prominent red crosses that were supposed to mean something to people who still believed in rules. Staff Sergeant Rosa Dean sat behind the wheel of the ambulance, both hands steady on the steering wheel as sand kicked up by the lead vehicle coated her windshield in a fine brown haze. She'd been driving ambulances at Forward Operating Base Phoenix for exactly 3 weeks, and in that time, she'd become completely invisible to everyone who mattered. The radio crackled with routine chatter as the convoy approached the base perimeter. Rosa guided the ambulance through the checkpoint with practiced ease, nodding to the gate guards who barely glanced at her. Just another supply run completed, just another day of driving while real soldiers did real work. She parked in the motor pool and started her post-mission checks with methodical precision that would have seemed obsessive if anyone had been paying attention. But nobody was paying attention to the ambulance driver. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb and his fire team were loading gear nearby, their conversation loud enough to carry across the motor pool. Webb had the kind of aggressive confidence that came from 3 combat deployments and a chest full of commendations he made sure everyone knew about. His team orbited around him like planets around the sun. Specialist Thompson, Corporal Davis, and Private First Class Martinez, all of them young and hungry to prove themselves. "Heard they're assigning us a driver for the next op," Thompson said, checking his rifle. "Please tell me it's not the ambulance girl again." Webb laughed, the sound carrying clearly to where Rosa was checking tire pressure. "Dean, she's fine for supply runs, I guess. Point A to point B without getting lost. But actual combat operations, she'd probably freeze up first time she heard incoming fire. I don't know why they even sent her here," Davis added. "We've got plenty of personnel who can drive and fight. What's the point of someone who can only do one?" Martinez, the youngest and quietest of the group, didn't join the mockery but didn't contradict it either. The implicit agreement was clear. Rosa Dean was dead weight, a warm body filling a slot that could have gone to someone useful. Rosa continued her checks without visible reaction. She had heard variations of this conversation for 3 weeks straight. The words slid off because she'd learned years ago that people who talked most about their capabilities were rarely the ones who delivered when situations turned desperate. She finished her inspection, logged her mileage, and headed to the barracks for rack time before her next shift. But Chief Warrant Officer Daniel Reeves had been watching from the maintenance bay, and what he saw didn't match what everyone else was seeing. The way Rosa moved around the vehicle showed awareness beyond basic driver training, how she positioned herself during the security briefing that morning, always facing entry points, back never to open spaces. The fact that her personal weapon, the M4 carbine all soldiers carried, showed signs of maintenance that went far beyond standard requirements. The rifle was clean enough to pass white glove inspection, but more than that, it was configured in a very specific way that Reeves had only seen once before in a classified briefing about maritime special operations. One evening, he found her in the motor pool after hours reorganizing the medical supplies in her ambulance. The standard loadout was good, but she was modifying it. Trauma supplies positioned for one-handed access in low-light conditions, tourniquets packed for rapid deployment, hemostatic agents arranged in the exact configuration used by special operations medics operating in denied areas. "That's an interesting setup you've got there, Dean," Reeves commented from the doorway, keeping his tone neutral. Rosa's hands paused for just a fraction of a second before continuing their work. "Just optimizing for efficiency, Chief. Making sure everything's accessible if we take casualties during transport. That's not standard ambulance configuration. That's combat medic loadout for high-threat environments." His observation carried professional curiosity rather than accusation. She looked at him with brown eyes that revealed absolutely nothing about what she was thinking. "Previous assignment had some unique requirements, Chief. Old habits die hard." Reeves let it drop, but he filed the observation with others that were accumulating into a profile that didn't match her official personnel record. Everyone who deployed to places like Forward Operating Base Phoenix carried secrets from previous assignments. Most people just hid them more effectively. The intelligence brief arrived on a Tuesday morning with the kind of casual delivery that suggested nobody in the command structure truly believed the threat assessment they were distributing. Enemy activity in the sector had increased dramatically over the past 2 weeks. Drone surveillance showed unusual movement patterns. Communications intercepts suggested coordinated planning across multiple militant groups that normally operated independently. Local informants had gone completely silent in patterns that clearly indicated systematic intimidation or elimination. The analysts included all their standard recommendations about enhanced security protocols and increased vigilance, the bureaucratic checkbox items that everyone acknowledged in official documentation without actually internalizing or acting upon because forward operating base Phoenix had enjoyed relative security for the past year. The assumption of continued safety was subtle, largely unspoken but completely pervasive throughout the entire command structure. Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell reviewed the assessment during her weekly staff meeting, sharing key points with department heads who displayed expressions ranging from genuine concern to obvious boredom. Elevated threat environment across the operational sector. Possible preparation for coordinated action against coalition installations. Recommend enhanced perimeter security and restricted movement protocols during identified high-risk periods. She looked around the conference room. Standard precautions apply. Maintain alertness. Follow established security protocols. Don't assume continued safety just because we've been fortunate so far. Questions. Nobody raised questions or expressed concerns worth discussing. They'd received virtually identical threat warnings monthly for over a year. Nothing had ever materialized beyond occasional harassing fire from distant positions or rare IED discoveries on patrol routes. Phoenix felt as secure as anywhere in Iraq could reasonably feel. Rosa heard about the intelligence brief third hand, reading the sanitized summary posted on the operations board in the motor pool. Her reaction differed fundamentally from her colleagues' casual dismissal. She spent extra time during her vehicle inspections that week, checking systems that went beyond standard maintenance requirements. She verified that her personal weapon had a full combat load of ammunition and that her spare magazines were properly maintained. She reviewed escape routes from various locations throughout the base and identified covered positions that could provide protection during an attack. Just mental exercises, she told herself. Professional habits from that previous career she'd left behind. But survival instincts forged in desperate circumstances didn't conveniently fade just because official paperwork said you had a different job now. The assault commenced at 0237 hours under a moonless sky when the base was operating at minimum manning levels and maximum vulnerability. The first rocket-propelled grenade streaked out of the surrounding darkness and impacted directly on the fuel storage depot, detonating with a catastrophic explosion that instantaneously lit up the entire night like artificial daylight. The massive blast triggered every alarm system simultaneously, shocking everyone from deep sleep into immediate crisis mode with absolutely no gradual transition. Rosa came awake instantly, the kind of alert consciousness that skipped past grogginess and confusion. The explosion's distinctive sound triggered recognition that bypassed conscious thought. Incoming fire, major attack, get to your vehicle. She was dressed and armed in under 30 seconds, moving through the barracks while others were still processing what was happening. Before anyone could organize a response, 6 more RPGs followed in rapid succession, systematically walking their destruction across the base with precision that clearly indicated detailed reconnaissance and pre-plotted targeting coordinates. The command center took a direct hit. The communications hub erupted in flames. The main generator facility exploded, plunging large sections of the base into darkness broken only by emergency lighting and the orange glow of spreading fires. Then the mortars started falling in earnest, not the occasional random harassment that sometimes hit Phoenix during quiet periods, but precisely targeted indirect fire from multiple positions attacking simultaneously with obvious coordination. The enemy had conducted detailed systematic study of American defensive patterns, methodically identified critical infrastructure and key defensive positions, and was now systematically destroying base capabilities in preparation for the ground assault that everyone suddenly realized with sinking dread was absolutely inevitable. Rosa reached the motor pool, moving low and fast, using cover instinctively. Her ambulance sat exactly where she'd left it, armored body and red crosses still visible in the firelight. She conducted a rapid visual inspection. Tires intact, no obvious damage, engine should be operational. The keys were in her pocket, always on her person, another habit from that previous life. The radio mounted in the ambulance crackled with increasingly frantic traffic as the base struggled to organize a coordinated response. All units, we have multiple breaches on the north and east perimeters. QRF mobilizing to Sector 3. Medical standby for mass casualties. Say again. Mass casualties expected. Rosa grabbed the handset. Phoenix Medical 1. Ambulance operational and ready for casualty evacuation. Where do you need me? Static. Then a harried voice she didn't recognize. Medical 1. Hold position at the aid station. We've got wounded coming in hot from multiple sectors. Stand by for transport to the emergency surgical facility. She acknowledged and started the engine. But even as she moved the ambulance toward the aid station, she could see the tactical situation deteriorating rapidly. Tracer fire arced across the compound from multiple directions. Another massive explosion shook the base, the ammunition storage bunker detonating in a secondary blast that sent shock waves rolling across the entire installation. The aid station itself was taking intermittent small arms fire, rounds pinging off sandbag barriers and concrete walls. Webb and his fire team came running past, moving toward defensive positions on the eastern perimeter. Even in the chaos, Webb found time to shout at her, "Dean, get that ambulance to the aid station and stay there. Let the real soldiers handle the fighting." Rosa didn't respond, just continued toward her assigned position. But she was reading the battlefield with eyes that had seen this scenario before in other places, other contexts. This wasn't a probing attack or opportunistic violence. This was a coordinated military assault by fighters who understood exactly what they were doing. The kind of operation that would overwhelm defensive positions if those defenders weren't prepared for the intensity that was coming. The aid station was chaos barely contained by training and discipline. Wounded soldiers were already arriving in ones and twos. A sergeant with arterial leg bleeding, a lieutenant with shrapnel peppered across his torso, a specialist whose right arm was barely attached. The medical staff worked with practiced efficiency, but Rosa could see the math working against them. The facility wasn't equipped for the volume of casualties this attack would generate, and they were taking fire from advancing enemy positions. The senior medic, Staff Sergeant James Carter, recognized her and pointed toward 3 litter patients. "Dean, these 3 need immediate transport to the surgical facility. Can you get them there?" She looked at the route. 300 meters of open ground between the aid station and the hardened surgical bunker, currently being swept by intermittent machine gun fire from enemy positions that had penetrated the outer perimeter. Doable, but it would require timing and speed. "I can get them there," she said simply. They loaded the casualties quickly. Rosa strapped them in, checked IV lines, and made sure nothing would come loose during rapid movement. Then she slid behind the wheel and planned her route. Not the direct path. That would be suicide. She'd use the cover provided by damaged buildings, move during pauses in the enemy fire pattern, and hope the red crosses meant something to whoever was pulling triggers out there. The run was 90 seconds of pure calculated risk. She accelerated hard, using the ambulance's armored mass to smash through debris blocking her alternate route. Rounds sparked off the vehicle's reinforced panels. One shattered the passenger window, showering her with glass, but she kept moving, weaving between obstacles, using every piece of available cover. The patients in back were getting thrown around more than ideal, but alive and thrown around beat dead and comfortable. She reached the surgical facility and backed up to the entrance, putting the armored vehicle between her patients and incoming fire. The surgical team emerged immediately to retrieve the wounded, moving with practiced efficiency despite bullets cracking overhead. 3 more coming in, Carter's voice crackled over the radio. "Dean, can you make another run?" Rosa was already turning the ambulance around. "On my way." She made 4 more runs in the next 30 minutes, each one more dangerous than the last as the enemy tightened their grip on the base. On the 5th run, an RPG missed her vehicle by less than 3 meters, the explosion close enough to rock the ambulance on its suspension and leave her ears ringing. But she kept driving, kept moving wounded soldiers from the aid station to surgery because that was the job and people would die if she didn't do it. It was during the 6th run that everything changed. She was loading 2 more patients when the aid station took direct fire from a heavy machine gun that had somehow gotten positioned on the eastern ridge overlooking their location. The burst walked across the sandbag barrier, forcing everyone to take cover. Rosa dropped flat, but from her position she could see the problem immediately. The machine gun had clear line of sight to both the aid station and the route to the surgical facility. Any vehicle trying to move would be exposed for at least 10 seconds, more than enough time for that gunner to tear through even armored ambulance panels. "We're pinned," Carter said, stating the obvious. Can't move. Can't evacuate casualties. That gun needs to be taken out. Webb's voice came over the radio, strained and urgent. All units, we've got enemy fighters inside the wire on the eastern perimeter. Say again. Hostiles have breached the inner security barrier. QRF is engaged but taking casualties. We need immediate support. Rosa's mind was already moving through options, tactical calculations that came from a place deeper than her current assignment. The machine gun position was maybe 200 meters away, elevated, protected by natural rock formations. Direct assault would be suicide for anyone approaching from the base. But there was a drainage culvert that ran along the eastern side of the compound, used for flash flood diversion, large enough for a person to move through, and it would put someone within effective range if they were willing to make the approach. She looked at her ambulance, then at the wounded soldiers waiting for evacuation, then at the M4 rifle mounted in the vehicle's cab, the weapon she'd been carrying for 3 weeks without ever firing except for required qualification, the weapon everyone assumed was just part of her driver equipment, basically decorative. Carter saw her looking at the rifle and misread her intention. Dean, don't even think about it. You're a driver, not infantry. We'll call for fire support, get mortars or something to suppress that position. Fire support is already engaged across 3 other sectors, Rosa said quietly. And those casualties will die if we can't evacuate them in the next 10 minutes. She moved to the ambulance and retrieved her rifle. The weapon came up naturally, muscle memory from thousands of repetitions guiding hands that knew exactly what they were doing. She checked the chamber, verified the magazine was seated, adjusted the sling for rapid movement. Every motion was economical, practiced, the movements of someone who'd done this so many times that conscious thought was unnecessary. Dean, what are you doing? Carter's voice carried alarm and confusion. She met his eyes, and for the first time in 3 weeks she let him see past the carefully maintained facade of the competent but unremarkable ambulance driver. I'm going to eliminate that machine gun position so you can evacuate these casualties. Give me 8 minutes. That's insane. You'll be killed before you get 50 meters. Probably not. She turned toward the culvert entrance. But if I am, someone else can try. Those soldiers don't have 8 minutes to wait for artillery support that might not come. Before anyone could physically stop her or order her to stand down, she was moving. The culvert was exactly where she remembered from her mental mapping of the base. 3 feet in diameter, concrete lined, angled toward the eastern perimeter. She entered low and fast, rifle leading, every sense alert for threats. The approach was 60 meters of controlled movement through confined space that smelled like stagnant water and rust. She could hear the machine gun firing in sustained bursts above her, the sound echoing through the culvert in ways that made range estimation difficult. But she'd done this kind of approach before in other places, other contexts where the stakes were just as high and the room for error was just as non-existent. She emerged from the culvert behind the enemy position, exactly where the drainage opened onto the hillside. The machine gun team, 3 fighters, 1 on the weapon and 2 feeding ammunition and spotting targets, were completely focused on the base below. They'd positioned themselves well. Natural rock providing cover from return fire, elevation giving them superior fields of fire. Professional, competent, dangerous. Rosa took 3 seconds to assess the tactical situation, calculate firing angles, identify the sequence that would neutralize all 3 targets before they could respond. Then she moved. The suppressed crack of her rifle was barely audible over the machine gun's sustained fire. The first fighter dropped without ever knowing someone was behind them. The second started to turn, reaching for his Alaska 47, but Rosa's second controlled pair caught him before he could bring the weapon to bear. The third fighter had enough time to register what was happening, enough time for his eyes to widen in shock, but not enough time to do anything about the rounds that dropped him next to his companions. 8 seconds from first shot to silence. The machine gun stopped firing, its crew no longer operational. Rosa moved immediately to secure the position, clearing each fighter to verify they were no longer a threat, then turning the captured machine gun to face back along the approach route in case there were more enemy fighters moving up. The position was clear. She keyed her radio. Aid station, this is Dean. Machine gun position neutralized. You're clear to evacuate. There was a long silence on the radio. Then Carter's voice came through, carrying a mixture of disbelief and something else. Dean, What? How did you evacuate your casualties, Staff Sergeant? We can discuss my training background later if we're still alive. She stayed in the captured position for the next 40 minutes, using the machine gun to provide covering fire as the aid station evacuated wounded and the quick reaction force moved to reinforce threatened sections of the perimeter. From her elevated position, she had clear observation of the eastern approach and she used it to devastating effect. Enemy fighters attempting to advance across open ground found themselves taking accurate fire from the position that was supposed to be supporting their assault. 3 separate attempts to retake the high ground failed when Rosa demonstrated that she knew exactly how to employ a PKM machine gun despite it being a Russian-designed weapon she theoretically should never have trained on. The tactical situation began to stabilize as Apache helicopters arrived overhead, their 30mm chain guns systematically destroying enemy positions with thermal-guided precision. The ground assault broke as fighters realized they'd lost their supporting fires and were being engaged by aerial assets they had no effective counter for. Within 20 minutes, the base perimeter was secure again, the enemy in full retreat, and the immediate crisis was over. Rosa soft-fed the captured machine gun, collected 3 Alaska 47 rifles and several ammunition magazines that would need to be documented as captured equipment, and made her way back down to the aid station. The route back seemed longer than the approach had been, exhaustion starting to settle into her muscles now that the adrenaline was wearing off. Carter met her at the entrance, his expression showing he was looking at someone completely different from the ambulance driver he'd worked alongside for 3 weeks. Behind him, Webb and his fire team were staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to something approaching fear. "Those casualties made it to surgery," Carter said. "All of them stable, all of them alive because you took out that gun position." Rosa nodded, too tired for extensive conversation. "Good. That's what mattered. Dean, what you just did." Webb started, then stopped, clearly struggling to reconcile what he'd witnessed with his previous assessment of her capabilities. "That wasn't. Normal soldiers can't. Normal soldiers can't take out a fortified position alone," she finished for him. "I know. Can we discuss this after I've filed my after-action report and gotten some rack time?" Before anyone could respond, a Humvee pulled up and Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell emerged, accompanied by a man in civilian clothes who somehow radiated military background despite the lack of uniform. The civilian had the weathered face of someone who'd spent years in hard places doing difficult things, and when his eyes found Rosa, something like recognition and respect passed between them. "Staff Sergeant Dean," Mitchell said carefully, "this is Robert Harrison, Defense Intelligence Agency. He's requested to speak with you immediately regarding tonight's events." Rosa looked at Harrison and knew exactly why he was here. The carefully maintained cover she'd built over 3 weeks had just evaporated in 40 minutes of doing what she'd been trained to do. "Yes, ma'am. Happy to provide whatever information is needed." The debriefing happened in Mitchell's office, a secure space where conversations stayed classified and uncomfortable questions got asked that might not have comfortable answers. Rosa sat across from Mitchell and Harrison while Chief Reeves stood quietly in the corner, finally getting answers to questions he'd been accumulating for weeks. "Your official personnel file says you completed basic combat training, advanced individual training as a motor transport operator, and have served in various logistics assignments for the past 4 years, Mitchell began. "Nothing unusual, nothing that explains what apparently just happened tonight." Before Rosa could answer, Harrison spoke. "Her official file is accurate as far as it goes, Colonel. But Staff Sergeant Dean has a secondary file that's classified at a level requiring special access. I've been authorized to provide context that wasn't included in her standard documentation." Mitchell looked between them, clearly not appreciating that one of her soldiers had significant background she hadn't been briefed on. "She's one of yours." "Not anymore," Harrison said, "but she was for 7 years. Embedded with naval special warfare units providing combat support in maritime environments. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and several other locations that don't appear in official documentation. She completed 187 missions with SEAL teams operating in denied areas, with a success rate that made her something of a legend in communities that don't hand out that designation lightly." Reeves straightened slightly in his corner. 187 missions. That's not possible. Nobody deploys that frequently without complete psychological breakdown. Harrison's smile was thin. "Staff Sergeant Dean isn't nobody, Chief. She's one of fewer than 20 personnel who completed a specialized program combining advanced tactical training with logistics and support operations. The program doesn't officially exist in any military documentation. They're the support personnel we send when the mission is too dangerous for conventional support and too important to risk operational failure due to inadequate logistics. Rosa sat quietly while her hidden history was systematically revealed to people who'd worked alongside her for weeks without having any idea who she actually was. She felt exposed in ways that had nothing to do with physical danger. The question, Mitchell said, focusing on practical command concerns, is why someone with that background and demonstrated capabilities was driving ambulances at my base while apparently concealing their true nature from everyone, including their commanding officer. Transition program, Harrison explained. Operators who've done extended time in highly classified programs eventually need to rotate into conventional forces. It's necessary for long-term psychological health, required for career progression beyond certain thresholds, and it allows them to integrate back into normal military life. Dean volunteered for the transition. The terms were that she'd work a standard deployment performing conventional duties, integrate fully into a regular unit, and not advertise her background unless circumstances made it absolutely necessary. And tonight was absolutely necessary, Reeves said. Harrison nodded. Which is why I'm here, to ensure there's no negative administrative or career consequences from her breaking operational cover. What Staff Sergeant Dean did tonight falls under combat operations conducted to preserve coalition lives under emergency circumstances that couldn't have been reasonably anticipated. No regulations were violated. No procedures were inappropriately circumvented. She did exactly what she was trained to do when the situation demanded it. Mitchell considered this, running through implications for unit cohesion and operational security. I'm not going to discipline someone who saved lives and contributed significantly to base defense during a coordinated enemy assault. But I also can't simply ignore that I have an operator with advanced special operations capabilities who's been essentially hiding among conventional personnel for 3 weeks. That's entirely up to Staff Sergeant Dean, Harrison said, turning to Rosa. You've fulfilled the terms of your transition program beyond any reasonable interpretation. Nobody expected you to conduct actual combat operations during what was supposed to be a quiet conventional deployment. You could request immediate reassignment back to your previous community, return to operating at the highest levels, or you could choose to stay here, continue serving in a conventional logistics role, and complete your deployment as originally planned. The choice hung in the air. Rosa thought about the 3 weeks she had spent driving an ambulance, the routine that had been peaceful in ways her previous operational life had never been. She thought about Webb and his team, who'd dismissed her casually but who'd also fought hard tonight. She thought about Carter, who'd done his job under fire despite having no advanced tactical training. She thought about all the soldiers at Phoenix who were doing their best in difficult circumstances. I'd like to stay and complete my deployment as planned, she said quietly. Continue driving ambulance, supporting medical operations, and teaching people here what I know so maybe next time they face a crisis, they're better prepared. Harrison nodded slowly, showing no surprise. You always did prefer building capabilities in others rather than being the solo hero. I'll file the appropriate paperwork. For official records, you remain assigned as a motor transport operator with medical support duties. What happened tonight gets classified appropriately. The people here know what you did, but outside this base you're still just an ambulance driver counting days until you rotate home. After Harrison left, Mitchell dismissed everyone except Rosa. They sat in silence for a moment before the colonel spoke. I'm putting you in for a commendation, Dean. I don't know what classification level it will ultimately carry, but what you did deserves recognition. Thank you, ma'am. But the people who really deserve recognition are the ones who stood their ground tonight despite being scared and outgunned. Over the following weeks, Forward Operating Base Phoenix slowly returned to normal operations, though normal had been fundamentally redefined. Rosa continued driving her ambulance on supply runs and medical evacuations, but the way people treated her had changed completely. Soldiers nodded with genuine respect. Medical personnel sought her guidance on trauma care. Even Webb approached her one morning with something approaching humility. Dean, I was wrong about you. Completely, totally wrong. I don't know what else to say except I'm sorry. She looked at him steadily. You can start by treating everyone with respect regardless of their job. Ambulance drivers and logistics personnel aren't lesser soldiers. We're all doing necessary work. Fair point. He managed a rueful smile. Also, would you be willing to run some tactical training for those of us who thought we knew combat but apparently have gaps in our knowledge? That, Rosa said, returning to her vehicle inspection, I can definitely do. She taught classes on tactical movement, combat medicine under fire, and defensive operations. She shared lessons from 187 missions without revealing classified details, giving them practical knowledge that might save lives. The training rippled through the base, improving capabilities across multiple units. 2 months later, Chief Reeves pulled her aside. I've been offered a position developing training curriculum for combat support personnel at Fort Lee. They want to build a program teaching people how to operate when logistics and combat blur together. I told them I'd only take it if you came as co-instructor. Rosa considered the offer. Everything she'd learned could be passed on systematically, building capabilities across the force. I'd need to clear it through appropriate channels. Take your time. The offer stands. She thought about it for a week before accepting. Teaching seemed like the right next step, a way to multiply her impact beyond individual operations. On her last day at Phoenix, Rosa made a final supply run. Webb and Carter rode along, both having become something like friends. As they drove through the Iraqi desert, Webb asked the question that had been bothering him. That night, when you went after that machine gun position alone, were you scared? Rosa was quiet for a moment, watching the road ahead. Terrified. But fear is just information. It tells you the stakes are high. What matters is what you do with that information. And what did you do with it? I did my job, same as everyone else that night. They rode in comfortable silence after that, 3 soldiers who'd learned that capabilities often hide in unexpected places, that the person who seems unremarkable might be exactly who you need when everything goes wrong, and that doing your job sometimes means stepping far outside your job description because lives depend on it. Rosa Dean went on to train thousands of support personnel in advanced combat operations, fundamentally changing how the military prepared logistics soldiers for modern warfare. But she always remembered her time as an ambulance driver at Forward Operating Base Phoenix, the weeks of being invisible, the night everything changed, and the lesson that sometimes the most important thing you can do is let people underestimate you until the moment they desperately need you to be something more. The wolf doesn't announce itself to the sheep. It just does what wolves do when sheep need protecting.